This episode is brought to you by Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. In breaking news, leading scientists worldwide are conducting experiments to determine if Reese's Peanut Butter Cups are the perfect combination of peanut butter and chocolate. However, it appears the study was inconclusive, as the scientists couldn't help but eat all the Reese's. Because when you want something sweet, you can't do better than Reese's. Find Reese's now at a store near you.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Singletracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today I'm talking with Mike Brcic, who is the founder of Sacred Rides, one of the top providers of mountain bike tours around the world. He's an educator with the Adventure Travel Association and a co-founder of Bikes Without Borders, a nonprofit dedicated to empowering marginalized communities through bike-related solutions. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to our chat.
So you've been doing what you do for a long time. What is it about biking that has you so stoked to share the experience with other people?
Yeah, it's funny when I think about my history with cycling, any type of cycling. I was actually a little bit of a late bloomer, and I didn't actually learn how to properly ride a bike until I was almost 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
But when I did, it was just this crazy aha moment. And we lived on this, when I was growing up, we lived on this street that was maybe about, I want to say 150, 200 yards long. And when I first, got my first bike, my parents said, "You can bike on our street, but we don't want you to bike any farther than that." And I would just bike up and down the street, back and forth for hours at a time. I just loved being on a bike so much, and the neighbors all thought I was a weirdo because I was just biking up and down
like a caged animal.
Yeah, exactly. And then eventually they let me explore the neighborhood, and there's this great little hill. I could climb up to the top of the hill and then bike down, and it was just like this whole other world of just joy and adrenaline and thrills and freedom that opened up to me. And I would say that's still the motivation to this day, is just about sharing that feeling of, just joy and happiness and adrenaline and freedom. And I think we can all relate to that, especially on a mountain bike.
Yeah.
Where there's this added element of, maybe you're out in the woods or you're up in the mountains, or there's this element of maybe solitude to it. And then, with what I've done with Sacred Rides, there's the whole element of exploring the world to it and exploring other cultures, and kind of always maintained that a mountain bike is really one of the most ideal ways to explore a country, because when you get on a mountain bike, you can get out there, you can get to regions that, you can't access with a tour bus or a van, but maybe it's also too far to really access on foot. So you get to these really out of the way places. And I think back to my first experience mountain biking in Peru, and we were going through these communities where they almost never saw tourists, and just these incredible outpourings of curiosity and welcoming us, and just amazing. So that's a big part of why I do what I do, and sharing that love.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, yeah, it sounds like in a lot of ways you're showing your parents now that you can ride wherever you want to. I mean, you've been all over the world with your bike, and you're like, yeah, I'm free now.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but maybe that's really it. Yeah, you're not going to constrain me to our little street anymore.
Right, take it to the extreme. And it's also awesome to think about the fact that mountain bikes can take us so many places that other tourists maybe haven't been, or, just places that are a little bit less accessible and maybe more authentic in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So how did Sacred Rides get started? Yeah,
I wouldn't recommend this as my path, as a career path for most people. But the day after my last exam out of university, I went to university here in Toronto, Canada. And the day after that last exam, I just packed up. I had a green Volvo station wagon, and I packed it up and drove out west to the mountains. Ended up in the little ski town of Fernie, British Columbia. Mm-hmm. And, over the course of the next 5-6 months, I got fired from my first 3 jobs there. And really, at the conclusion of that, kind of came to this self-realization that maybe I'm just not cut out to be an employee. I don't work well for others. Mm-hmm. And after getting fired from my 3rd job, I was actually walking along this river trail with a couple friends, kind of scratching my head and wondering what I was going to do next, because I clearly wasn't cut out to be working for others. And my friend said, "Well, you're just gaga about mountain biking, and there's all these amazing mountain bike trails here, and most of them are really hard to find, and maybe some people will will want to pay you to take them exploring around the valley. And that kind of, I didn't really think much of it at first, but it kind of percolated over the next couple of days, and I said, hey, maybe I could do that. And I ended up convincing another friend to join me on this venture, and we ended up getting a $10,000 loan to get started. Didn't really know what we were doing. I still actually have a copy of our first business plan, which is kind of laughable. And it's actually the cover is in that Comic Sans font, which is also pretty funny, professional, of course. But from the beginning, our ambitions were pretty simple. We were going to get a fleet of mountain bikes that we could rent out, and then we were going to offer day trips around the valley. And our first summer, we did a grand total of one day trip.
Oh wow!
And off to a roaring start. We managed to rent enough bikes that kind of keep us going. We certainly weren't getting wealthy in the process, but we could at least manage the loan payments. Mm-hmm. And I like to tell this story of our first customer, and I think we actually did rock, paper, scissors to see who would take him out. And I won, and I took this guy out, and he definitely must have thought I was drunk or high or something, because I just had this huge grin on my face the entire time, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and I just could not believe that somebody was actually paying me to go mountain biking, and that this is how I was earning money. And that was enough to carry the Stoke on through the winter. And so the next year we had incredible growth. We had 2 customers, so we had 100%,
200%,
yeah,
or 100%,
100% growth. And again, we managed to rent enough bikes that it was almost a viable business. But the real breakthrough came in our 3rd year, when we had sort of this mentor. He was a successful local entrepreneur, and he'd kind of been giving us a little bit of advice. And he said, well, why don't you put together some overnight trips? Surely there'd be people who'd want to spend 5 or 7 days with you doing that. And there's way more money in that than, you got to do hundreds of these day trips. So we put together a couple week-long overnight trips, and those, they didn't fly off the shelves, but they certainly did. I think we did 3 or 4 that first summer. We did 3 or 4 week-long trips, and that was just a blast, and it gave us a real opportunity to give people a really deeper view into just this amazing backcountry around Fernie in the southeast, Canadian Rockies, and really give them a deep immersion into just this incredible area and this great mountain biking, and, all these special places that we'd been exploring over the last few years. And things really took off from there.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a really cool story. So over the years, I imagine you met a lot of people, rode with a lot of different mountain bikers from all over the place. And so as a tour operator and a ride leader, I feel like, a big part of your job is to keep people safe and make sure that they have a good time. So how do you temper a need to push riders beyond their comfort zone with making sure that they enjoy the overall experience?
I don't actually see that as a trade-off. Pushing people out of their comfort zone has always kind of been part of how we approach things. And my experience has been, in the early years, the first 10 years of the company, from 1996 to 2006, I was doing everything, guiding, cooking, driving, marketing department, sales department, finance, you name it. So, yeah. And as we got busier over those years, we were running back-to-back trips from mid-June right through end of September. So doing a lot of guiding and a lot of people. And, my discovery and my take on it was that when we pushed people out of their comfort zones, and it's not necessarily, we were taking them on crazy hard trails. We did that sometimes, but sometimes it was pushing them out of their comfort zone in terms of how much physical energy they were going to expend on that day. And they might not necessarily appreciate it in the moment. They're grunting up some hill, and they're sweating, and they're cursing, and it's not a particularly enjoyable feeling in the moment. But later that night, sitting around the campfire, or even a few weeks later, just really appreciating it more than just, hey, we're out kind of cruising along. So I never really saw that as a trade-off, because that was how we got people to really truly savor and enjoy that experience. And I'm sure you can relate to this, some of those kind of disaster rides where maybe the weather turns really crazy and you're getting hailed on, or you get lost or whatever. Those are the experiences that really really stand out many years later, and you kind of the any pain and suffering in that moment kind of fades, and just the the sheer adrenaline and whatever of that moment is what endures afterwards. And actually, saying that reminded me of I think it was probably around year 4 or year 5. We were way out in the backcountry of southeastern BC. We were in this area called the Flathead Valley, and we were biking into this provincial park called Akamina Kishinina. And very remote park. Most people enter it from the east through Waterton Lakes, which is a popular park, but we entered through the western side, which there's a guest book there. Any given year, there'd be fewer than 20 people that access it through that end. So we were coming in through that end, very remote, tons of wildlife everywhere, grizzly, already kind of a crazy experience for a lot of people. But then with about 5 miles to go to get to our ultimate destination, this crazy storm rolled in, and it was just like lightning, hailstones, like really crazy, trees getting struck around us. People are like running, and, we're telling people to get off their bikes, and we're running to the closest shelter we could find. Yeah. And it was kind of a crazy moment. People were not totally freaking out, but there's a little bit of panic there. And then afterwards, all people could talk about was what a cool experience that was, and people emailing me like months afterwards saying, oh, that was one of the highlights of my life, was that crazy experience. So we've never shied away from those types of crazy experiences. Mm-hmm. And of course, safety is a huge concern, but we do a lot of training with that. And our guide manual is dozens of pages long, and there's all kinds of, every scenario you could possibly encounter is in there. So yeah, it is a fine balance,
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, you take sort of the long view, and it's a really good view, in my opinion, the long view of the experience. Like, you may not be enjoying it now, but you're going to enjoy it later. But what do you do like in that moment? Like, do you just ignore someone who's complaining? Do you empathize with them? Like, what's been sort of the thing that works for you to like get somebody through a ride when they're really not having fun in the moment? Mm-hmm.
Well, you sort of touched on it. Empathy is really important in moments like that. You can't just say, "Oh, suck it up, Buttercup."
Especially if they're paying you, you can't say that.
Exactly, and that's a bit of an art too, right? It's and one of the worst things I've found is to really minimize the amount of, or downplay the amount of additional suffering. And that's very easy for a guide to, somebody's like just sucking wind trying to get up a hill, and you're like, oh, it's just a few more minutes, when it's actually, half an hour or something like that. And you just want to, ease their pain. But then when you say it's, 10 more minutes, and then at the 15-minute mark, it's still obvious they got a long way to go, they're going to hit you even more.
Right.
A dose of realism is really important, and a dose of empathy. You just say, hey, listen, I know you're struggling. I know it sucks. But trust me, when you get to the top of this hill and you see that view, we're going to take a nice little rest, and all that pain and suffering is going to vanish from your memory, and it'll all be worth it. And then people, given trip, whether it's a week long or 5 days long or 10 days long, there's going to be plenty of moments like that where people are really hurting or suffering, or they feel like they're in over their head, whatever. But they do that a few times, and then they really come to appreciate the value of that suffering. They come to appreciate the reward that comes with that suffering. And years later, they're not going to remember how hard they were huffing up a hill. They're going to remember the view they had on top of that hill, and they're going to remember that amazing descent that they had down. So, it's just a matter of getting people comfortable with the idea that good things don't come without effort and often a little bit of suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Well, so over the years, I imagine you've done a number of different types of trips, whether it be for more experienced mountain bikers or maybe like newer mountain bikers. So what does success look like when you're introducing somebody to a new trail, perhaps, in a place they've never ridden, or even to mountain biking for the first time? What are you trying to do with that experience, and what do you hope somebody takes away from it?
Yeah, a great question. Most of our longer trips they're generally for an audience that is experienced mountain bikers. Not necessarily. We have trips that are for advanced riders. We have some that are more for immediate, but in general, they're it's not for somebody who's slinging a leg over a mountain bike for the first time. But when you asked that question, I thought back about this. Probably be I'm thinking about 10 years ago, when there's this trail network here in Toronto called the Don Valley. Big, huge network of Singletrack. It's I think one of the biggest urban networks of single track in North America. And we're blessed with this amazing ravine system here in Toronto that I think is fairly unparalleled in North America. And there's a lot of green space throughout the city and this huge network of trails. And but hardly anybody knows about it. And it's changed a lot over the last 10 years. More people have come to discover it. But back then, it was kind of like this well-kept secret. Mm-hmm. And, I didn't really want to necessarily let the secret or let the cat out of the bag, but I also wanted to expose more people to this amazing resource. So we launched this weekly, mountain bike skills series, and we had beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels. And it was, show up every Tuesday night for the next 5 weeks. And we had a bunch of different instructors, but I was also one of the instructors. Mm-hmm. And I took on the beginner group. And, at first I was a little bit resentful. Like, why did I give myself the beginner group? I want to be out there riding the hard trails with the more advanced riders. But it was one of the most rewarding things I've done, because taking people who have, maybe never been on a mountain bike before, and then teaching them the basics of mountain biking, and at the same time introducing them to this amazing, semi-wilderness resource right at their doorstep was incredible. And the one enduring thing from that is the confidence that it engendered in people. And we would do a lot of stuff. We would do a lot of sessioning on trails. We would come to some sort of obstacle, whether it's a log across the trail or whatever, and we would stop. And I would just take people one by one through this thing, and usually stay there until everybody's managed to successfully clear this thing, unless there's somebody who's really got a mental block about it, whatever. But seeing people, who we'd come up to a log and be like, oh my God, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to ride that. And they're kind of a little bit freaked out. And, I'd calm them down a bit, and we'd set up spotters and the whole thing. And then they would do it a few times until they get it. And then it's like this amazing light bulb moment. And they're like, oh my God. And, people are high-fiving each other and cheering. And it's amazing to see just people's sense of accomplishment and pride when they do something like that. Yeah. And then amazing to see over the course of 5 weeks, somebody who didn't, know the first thing about mountain biking, by the end of it, they're riding some pretty challenging obstacles, and they develop this incredible feeling of confidence. And I've had people reach out to me afterward and just say, I want to thank you for this course, because not only did it teach me confidence on a mountain bike, but that's spilled over into other areas of my life. And I've seen that on an even more extreme scale with some of our longer trips, And then also lots of people who said, thank you for introducing me to these trails. I never knew they existed. And, we're out here all the time. I'm out here with my kids now. And, that to me is success, just seeing people light up like that, and just, getting more people into mountain biking.
Yeah, it sounds super rewarding.
Yeah.
So over the years, obviously you've ridden a lot of places, and your company has guided people all over the world. So what are some of the most interesting places you've personally explored by bike?
Yeah, I have to go back to Peru on this one. And Peru was actually the first place I've ridden outside of Canada. And so, this is 2006. I just moved back to Toronto from Fernie, from this, little beautiful town in the Rockies to this big city. I was kind of wondering what to do with my company at the time. Do I fold it? Do I try to sell it? Whatever. Was a little bit unsure. And I ended up getting this email from this guy in Peru who was running a company down there doing day trips around Cusco and Lima, and he was looking for somebody to partner with to develop these longer trips. So he invited me down there to check it out. And on a whim, I said, yes, sure, I'll check it out. I brought a couple of journalist friends with me. And that trip was really just, it still stands out to this day. We don't offer that trip the same way that I did that trip, and the way that we offered it in the first couple of years, where we flew to this town called Andahuaylas, which is in the interior, and then overland, basically, through the Andes, ended up in Cusco over the course of the next 7 days. That experience of going through these really remote areas, these communities where people are coming out to greet us, these incredible trail, like I've never experienced downhills like that ever since. You have these downhills that are like 11,000 feet of vertical from top to bottom. And it's wow. And you think, oh my God, it can't possibly go on any longer. We've been riding downhill for so long, and you're only halfway down.
Wow. And
so that combination of incredible riding, this spectacular scenery, the culture of Peru, Inca culture, Quechua culture, is an amazing combination. And to me, that sort of embodies, everything that's amazing about what we do is this opportunity to not only ride these great trails, but explore this, this unique culture and this incredible country. So Peru's kind of always at the top of my list. I guess maybe, the most interesting trip I ever did was 3 years ago now, I think I want to say, in Greenland. And we started near the ice cap in a town called Kangerlussuaq. And I think it's about a little over 100 miles from there to the coast. This was in early April, so it was still very much winter there. And it was a fat bike trip. And it's along this trail. I mean, there's no trail in the winter, but it's called the Arctic Circle Trail. And there's 4 or 5 huts along the route. They're mainly used by local hunters, but we overnighted in these huts, and it was just I've never experienced wilderness and solitude on that level before, where it's just like Greenland's. I don't know what the exact size of Greenland is, but it's massive. It's probably like half of the size of the United States or something crazy like that. And there's only 50,000 people in the entire country, and all of those people live on the coast. So this is extreme wilderness on another level, and it was a really difficult trip, and I suffered on that trip like I never have before. But again, going back to that earlier conversation, that was a really peak experience for me, and just an amazing experience of being just completely out there, like in one of the remotest places on earth. That was incredible.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. So it sounds like in Peru you found some really awesome trails, and then in Greenland, I mean, it almost sounds like you were blazing your own trail. Is it difficult to find good mountain bike trails in various places around the world? And also, is that getting easier? I mean, I feel like mountain bike tourism is more of a thing now than it used to be. So what's been your experience in finding these places to take people?
Yeah, well, it definitely is more of a thing than it used to be by leaps and bounds. And when I think back to that first trip to Peru, in terms of the local mountain bike scene, it was our lead guide and, a handful of his friends and maybe a few dozen other people in the country. And now it's exploded, and there's a massive mountain bike scene there. And those people are out there maintaining and building trails. We still to this day on a trip like that, we're mountain biking on old Inca roads, that were built hundreds and hundreds of years ago to connect various parts of the empire, and footpaths connecting villages and stuff like that. So the vast majority of what we're riding in a location like that, or in a place like Guatemala or Nepal, these are footpaths that are connecting different places and different villages and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then it's really the challenge of finding something that's actually rideable, right? So obviously something that you can get across on your feet doesn't necessarily translate into being totally rideable on a bike. So that's the big challenge in finding those in a place like that, developing country or something like that. There's probably not a lot of purpose-built trails, but we know that there's thousands of miles of, these types of paths that can be used for mountain bikes. And so it's a balance of finding something that's rideable, but also something that isn't going to disrupt local foot traffic, stuff like that, that's being respectful to the local communities and all that kind of stuff. And then there's other places, where they're North America, Western Europe, stuff like that, where there's tons and tons of purpose-built stuff. And then the big challenge is, how do we do this legally and with respect for local landowners and mountain bike clubs and trail builders and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. It's probably less of a challenge doing that in developing countries where there isn't a mountain bike scene, because there isn't the same level of regulation and oversight and all that kind of stuff. If we want to launch a new destination in the United States, we're dealing with the BLM, Bureau of Land Management. We're dealing with Forest Service. We're dealing with municipal levels of government. We're dealing with, all kinds of stuff that exists to serve a purpose, but often can have so many bureaucratic layers of complexity. It's like, oh my God, this isn't worth it. I'm going to Kazakhstan where I'm not going to see another person for 100 miles and nobody cares what the hell we're doing. So, but for me personally, it's like exploring those really unknown and underknown and underused places. That's really exciting, because there's just this buzz of like, like the Greenland trip, we were the third and fourth people to ever bike that route. There was a couple guys who did it the year before. That's pretty cool and exciting to know that you're kind of blazing a trail, so to speak, metaphorically and literally.
Yeah, very cool. So a lot of these mountain bike tours and holidays appear to be fairly expensive for a lot of people. So what would you say to someone who thinks that like a Sacred Rides trip, for example, is too expensive for them or that it's overpriced? Like what value do guests get out of doing a tour with, somebody like Sacred Rides versus going it alone?
Mm-hmm. So that's probably a common knock on our industry. You look at the price of a typical trip, let's say, $3,000 for a 7-day trip, and you're looking at, that's about a little over $400 a day. I can get myself a hotel for X number of dollars, and I can brown bag it, whatever. I can do this for a fraction of the price. And of course, right. You can. By all means, go do it. That's entirely viable. When you actually total up the actual costs, when you look at the cost of the vans and the fuel and the guides and the lodging and the food and everything that goes into an experience like this. It adds up pretty quickly. And I can tell you, nobody is in our industry because there's easy money to be made here.
Right. Margins
are actually not that great in our industry. And you have to charge what seems like a lot in order just to make it a viable business. And in terms of value, I guess there's two kind of main values from it. One is you can just show up, with our trips, you show up, you want to go ride Peru with us, you just show up in Lima. We get your flight details in advance. There's somebody waiting at the airport with a sign in their hand, take you to your hotel. You're going to wake up the next morning to a great breakfast. You're going to hop in a van. You're going to get taken with a couple of local guides to an incredible trail that maybe you would never find it out about on your own. You would never be able to find it on, Trail Forks or something like that. And you're going to ride incredible trails. Somebody's going to be taking care of your snacks, feeding you an amazing lunch in a remote village. You'll get an opportunity to, meet locals, stuff like that. And you don't have to think about a thing. It's all taken care of you, and you're going to ride all the best trails there. You're not going to be looking at maps or second guessing yourself, stuff like that. And then the other is you're going to have an opportunity to just meet incredible people from around the world. Your guides for one, but then all these other people who are gathering together for this shared experience. Mm-hmm. And as we probably all know, the experience of riding together is a great way for people to bond. You go for a great, maybe not doing that much bonding in the act of riding itself because you're kind of busy paying attention to the trail, but go for a beer afterwards or whatever, talk about the bail that you took on this obstacle or something like that. It's a great experience, and it's a great way for people to connect. And we know from experience that people who go on our trips often remain connected to the other people on their trip for years and sometimes a lifetime afterwards. And we've had people get married because they met on our trips, and we've had people develop really deep lifelong friendships. And if you don't have your own kind of posse of people to ride with and travel with, it's a great way to meet other people. And probably about 70-80% of the people that come on our trips are on their own. And either they don't have a regular riding crew, or they do, and their regular riding crew doesn't have the means or doesn't like to travel or whatever. So there's a lot of value in that, but of course it's not for everyone, right? Like you want to go to Moab, you can stay at the campground, and Moab's pretty easy to get around. Right. You can find your own way around and ride your brains out and have a great time. Yeah. That's a little bit harder to do in the Mustang Valley of Nepal or, the backcountry of Peru, for instance.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you make a really good point that while you could try to put together some of these trips on your own, there's a lot of risk that you're going to miss out on things, or you're going to make mistakes in terms of where you stay or even what bike you ride or who you hook up with. And it seems like these holidays, they just put it all together for you and make it much less stressful and guarantee that you're going to ride something that's worth riding. Like you didn't waste your time traveling halfway around the world and then realize there's nothing there for you.
Exactly.
So you have traveled the world in your role at Sacred Rides, and you've worked with guides all across the globe. So how has that influenced the Bikes Without Borders mission? Bikes
Without Borders would not exist without Sacred Rides, and it was very much born out of Sacred Rides. So again, this Peru factors into this story, plays a, I guess, really pivotal role in the evolution of Sacred Rides and of Bikes Without Borders. one of our clients who lives a couple hours north of Toronto was going on a trip to Peru with us, and she said, "Hey, I've got all these good quality bikes in my garage. They need a little bit of work, but they're generally in great shape. Is there someone in Peru that could use these bikes?" And I thought, oh, I'm sure there is. So I sent an email to our lead guide in Peru and I say, "Hey, if I brought a dozen bikes with me, do you think any of the communities where we operate would use them?" And he emailed back right away. "Oh my God, they would be life changing down there. People generally can't afford bikes, but often, getting around is very difficult, especially in some of the more remote communities." So I messaged her back and she said, great. She ended up organizing a bike maintenance pizza party the next night or a couple of nights later, and a whole bunch of people from the community showed up and worked on these bikes, got them in great condition, put them in boxes, and then shows up at my door a day later with these 10 bikes, and just kind of drops them off. So I ended up lugging these things down to Peru with me, and we took them to this community, Santo Domingo de los Olleros, which is way up high in the mountains of the Andes, about 3 hours outside of Lima. We ended up giving them to the local school, and ended up meeting with the school headmaster, and he practically broke my hand from shaking it so hard. And he said, "Oh, these bikes are going to make such a huge difference." I think we had about 8 adult bikes and 4 kids bikes.
Wow. Seems like that would be tough to get those down there in the first place.
It was. It was. And so ended up going back to that community about 6 months later, and schoolmaster comes out to greet this is a small village, I'm guessing probably 400 or 500 people, right? So when a big van full of mountain bikers shows up, it's kind of a big deal. So the community comes out, he comes out, and again he's shaking my hand. He's like, "Oh my God, these bikes are incredible. We rent them out to the local farmers for 4 cents a day, and some of them have to walk an hour or two to get to their fields, and they can get there in a fraction of the time. They have more time for farming. They make more money because they're able to farm better. And the kids' bikes, we give them to kids when they try really hard at school, and all the kids want to use these bikes. So everybody's school grades have gone up and everything like that. And so it was a really eye-opening window into the power of the bike in these communities where transportation is such an issue. There's people don't have cars there. Public transport is like a bus that rolls through once a week, and they don't have bikes. There might be a few horses here and there. So bike is this really empowering thing. We ended up doing, I think, a couple more donations of bikes there, and then my wife suggested to me, "Hey, this appears to really be making an impact. Why don't we create a nonprofit?" And so we ended up doing that. We did a big fundraiser, Toronto Islands, and raised, I think, about $50,000.
Wow.
There, and ended up launching a project in Malawi, Africa, donating new bikes and these bicycle ambulances, which are essentially a stretcher that attaches to the back of a bike.
Oh, cool.
And ended up doing this whole project there, and then a big impact assessment afterwards. And ultimately the impact of something like that, where you have these community health workers who are volunteers who are trained by local NGOs or international NGOs, and they do all this life-saving work, but when they're walking an hour or 2 hours from village to village, that really limits how effective they can be. And the simple act of donating a bike to them means they can reach so many more people and can be so much more efficient in their work. And over time that's morphed, and currently we're doing a project where we collecting and refurbishing old bikes here in Toronto, and then we work with community agencies around the city to donate bikes to new refugees who need help with transportation. So they're two completely different organizations now, Sacred Rides and Bikes Without Borders. But Bikes Without Borders wouldn't exist without all the travel that I've done around the world and seeing the impact of bikes in some of these communities.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting and cool to see how bikes can help people all over the world. So it seems like today people are just now discovering all the interesting and unique places to ride sort of, locally and within their own regions. And people now, it's pretty common in the US anyway for people to travel across the country to places like Moab or to Pisgah to ride. So has international mountain bike travel benefited from this sort of seemingly new awareness and desire to explore new trails?
Yeah, well, the short answer would be yes. When we started out, which is now coming up this June will be 23 years since I started the company.
Mm-hmm.
It was really, in those early years, it was a really big effort just to convince people why it didn't really exist, this concept of guided mountain bike travel. And so a lot of our work was just to convince people of the value of doing something like this. And, being met with a lot of skepticism, like, oh my God, that sounds like the stupidest thing ever. Why would I want to go somewhere? I love mountain biking because it's my way of, getting out there by myself and freedom and I'm a rebel and all this kind of stuff. So trying to convince people that it was a good idea. And then, over the years, as more and more people have come through our doors and they discover, they really discover, hey, this actually is kind of cool. And I get to meet all these cool people and I get to ride all these great trails and somebody's taking care of everything for me. And, I don't have to spend weeks dealing with all the prep and logistics beforehand. So, and again, this is, a lot of people, it's just not the right thing for them at all. Particularly if you're used to just bombing up and down trails as fast as you possibly can and trying to clock as many miles on your odometer, it's definitely not the right thing for you because you're going to end up, at certain points, you're going to end up waiting for people. You've got to enjoy the group experience, and that's the whole package, right? Which involves waiting for people. Sometimes it involves getting pissed off by other people, whatever, right? But then there's, all the joy that comes with that as well. So, over the years, more and more people have discovered the value of this type of experience, and that has certainly helped the industry as a whole. But also, discovering that there's way more to explore out there on a mountain bike than people thought before. People thought in their little, Moab, Whistler, Pisgah sort of buckets, or maybe if they were feeling exotic, they'd hop over to Europe and ride in a place like Morzine or something like that. And now they're discovering that, holy crap, I can ride my mountain bike just about anywhere in the world. Whether that's riding on single track type stuff or gravel grinder type stuff or whatever, pretty much anywhere in the world. Particularly the more kind of off the beaten path you get, there's already a network of footpaths and animal trails and whatever that you can explore on a mountain bike. And unless you're the really adventurous type who enjoys going to the remote backcountry of Kazakhstan, not knowing a word of Kazakh and potentially risking all kinds of things, that's not really that type of experience is only open to a few people who are really on the extreme end of the adventure scale. But you can still have a lot of that same feeling of like, wow, we're on an adventure, right, with a capital A, exploring these really cool places, but I don't have to be worried about getting lost. I've got somebody who can speak the local language and integrate me with the local communities and all that kind of stuff. And they're really, people are really discovering just, how cool of an experience that could be. So that seems to really be growing in the industry as a whole.
Yeah. Well, have the changes in bikes helped with that as well? I mean, I imagine a lot of these trails, since they aren't purpose-built for mountain biking, they can be kind of rough and remote, as you say. So are things like, fatter tires or more reliable components, like, is that making it easier, or is that opening up, places that maybe you wouldn't have considered running a trip before?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think back to my first actual mountain bike, and it was a company called Balance, and I think they were out of California. And this was early '90s, and I had a subscription to Mountain Bike Action, and I'd be looking through the ads at the back, those 2-page ads, like all these parts and whatever, and just saw this frame for sale. And I just ordered the frame, and that was all I could afford at the time. And then had a little bit more money, so I ordered a drivetrain, and then, it took me probably about 6 months to finally finish the bike, and probably cost me 3 times more than actually just buying a bike. But when I think back to that first bike, it had 1-inch travel forks on it. I think they were Rock Shocks probably, and it was a hardtail. And if I took something like that on our what we offer as our Peru trip right now, I'd come home a broken man. There's some, it's not all rough. Some of the trails are actually decently smooth, but there are definitely enough rough sections in there that I wouldn't want to ride that. We do get people, who are, into that sort of thing, doing it on a hardtail. Sometimes you get the odd crazy person who wants to do it on a fully rigid because they're just amazing riders and they can do it. But you get long travel bikes, that opens up a whole other world. The other big thing, which I think we'll see a lot more of over the coming years, is e-bikes, e-mountain bikes.
Yeah.
We don't offer an e-mountain bike trip. We don't offer e-mountain bike rentals, but it's definitely a conversation we've had frequently. We haven't really gone anywhere with it. I don't think it's the type of thing where you can mix. I don't know if I'd want to run a trip where 7 of the people are riding conventional mountain bikes, and then you have 2 people who are riding e-mountain bikes, right. and these 7 people are sucking wind and suffering, and the other people are just kind of cruising up. That would probably create a weird dynamic. So
right.
I think it's got to be kind of an all e-bikes type of thing. And the issue with that is they're not allowed on every trail network, and they're hard to find. There aren't too many stores that have like a big fleet of e-mountain bikes, and they're also hard to travel with, right? Because it's hard to travel with the batteries. But that's going to shift, and I think to our clientele, people who've been coming with us for the last 20 years, a lot of those people are now maybe in their 50s or maybe in their 60s. They still love to ride, they still ride hard, but they just don't have the stamina, and they would hop all over the idea of a week-long e-mountain bike trip, particularly if everybody else was on an e-bike and they didn't have to worry about the stigma associated with it. So that's going to open up a lot of stuff, I think, over the coming years, and it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, it seems like gravel bikes as well, these like all road type bikes will be really efficient for trips. And again, it's like people are discovering places that, maybe mountain bikers too, they wouldn't travel to some of these places because there isn't like single track necessarily, but you've got gravel roads all over the world, and it seems like that's a great vehicle for exploring that as well.
Yeah, for me personally, as somebody who spends, when I have a choice to go out and ride, I'm riding single track, and I never really thought I would enjoy a kind of gravel grinder type thing, but I've had a few experiences where, I look at it from the standpoint of anytime I'm on a bike, it doesn't matter what I'm doing, I'm enjoying myself. It's just fun being on a bike. But you get somewhere. You get on a gravel road or a dirt road, and you're out in the backcountry, and the sun is shining. You're in these beautiful areas, and I'm not necessarily getting the thrill of riding on single track, but it can still be a really magical experience. I think back to that Greenland experience. We were biking on snow and ice for a week. There wasn't any single track riding there, but that was every bit as magical as an experience I've had riding incredible single track in Peru or in BC or something like that. So many options when you're riding a bike, and combining it with this element of discovery and exploring new places. That's just magical.
Yeah, for sure. So finally, I want to ask you, what are some up and coming mountain bike destinations to consider over the next 3 to 5 years? Are there certain countries or regions that are like really developing mountain bike tourism, or are there maybe some places that are under the radar that you'd love to check out?
Yeah, there's so many. Like I go to this conference called the Adventure Travel World Summit, and it's this big adventure travel conference that brings together about 800 people in the adventure travel industry, and it's a different part of the world every year. And I have so many conversations with people all over the world, saying, "Oh, you need to come to our area. We've got incredible mountain biking," and it's just so many places everywhere around the world. Just this real explosion, and I don't know whether there's necessarily the numbers to to fill up all these different destinations, but I think that'll come later. But a lot of communities and a lot of regions and countries are seeing the benefit, not just mountain bike tourism, but cycling tourism in general, and it's really really a hot topic. One area that I think is really going to blossom over the coming years is Africa, and all over that continent, which is really, I think, underappreciated destination for tourism in general, but also specifically for mountain bike tourism and cycling tourism. And
yeah,
I know a few operators in South Africa and Namibia. Like mountain biking, as you probably know, is huge in South Africa, massive. Like these races that draw thousands and thousands of people. But it's not just in Southern Africa. All of these other countries that have incredible topography and geography and amazing riding. I think that's going to be a big growth area over the coming years. But also, these out of the way places like Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, places that have these incredible landscapes, but nobody knows about them. And all it really takes is a little bit of awareness and people getting over the stigma of like, oh, I've never heard of Kazakhstan. It must be dangerous. I'm going to get killed. I'm not going to go there. So it just takes a little bit of awareness and a shift in consciousness, and these regions can really become, it's funny, how the global tourism industry works. Sometimes there's no accounting for how changes in tastes happen, and we'll have a year where we're just filling up every single spot we have on our New Zealand trips, and then next year we have the hardest time filling up New Zealand, and all of a sudden everybody wants to go to Nepal, for instance. And there's often no rhyme or reason to it. It's just like certain destinations just, become part of the zeitgeist or whatever. But, I've always, for years, thought, I want to put together a trip in Antarctica. I don't know. I would imagine the logistics of trying to do some sort of bike trip in Antarctica would be crazy, but I'm sure somebody's going to do it soon enough.
Right. Yeah, there was a video a few years ago from, I forget who the athletes were, but they, took a boat over there and like did a little bit of free riding. Yeah, definitely looks rugged and rough.
Yeah, you could say.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thanks so much, Mike, for talking with us. Really enjoyed our conversation and learned a lot about leading mountain bikers on trips around the world. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, Jeff.
So you can learn more about Sacred Rides and some of the trips that they have on offer at sacredrides.com. And remember, if you're enjoying the Singletracks podcast, we'd love to have you rate us in the iTunes podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts. That's all I've got this week. Talk to you again next week. Peace.